Welcome to Big Questions Episode 5. Why do I feel attacked for what I believe? One of the toughest things about being a Christian is when people ask you questions or say things about your views that make you feel dumb, old-fashioned, or even worse, like you are a terrible person. It seems ironic that someone can make you feel bad for being like Christ. But as our culture moves further away from the Christian values it was founded on, the definition of good and bad changes. Two important things to remember if you find yourself in this situation are: 1. There are very good reasons for the things we believe, and clear, logical answers that you can give when questioned or confronted. 2. Believers have always been attacked by non-believers throughout history, so this is nothing new. Today is just a more subtle form of attack or persecution than before. One of the first records of someone getting attacked for what they believe is Noah. His peers and everyone around him thought he was crazy because they either didn't believe in God or didn't believe God told him there would be a flood. So in their eyes, he was wasting his life preparing for a flood they didn't ever think would come. But in reality, he was the only one who didn't waste his life because he survived when the flood came and they all died. There's another example a few generations after Noah, the tragic story of Lot. Lot was Abraham's nephew and came with him all the way from Ur. But then once they got to the land of Canaan, unfortunately decided to part ways with his uncle and move to Sodom and Gomorrah. He rose to some amount of power and influence over time, but the people of Sodom began to resent Lot because they didn't agree with Lot's beliefs. It reached a climax when the men of the city attacked Lot's house and were angry at him because two strangers came into the city and Lot was hiding them in his house. There was some dialogue, and then in Genesis chapter 19 and verse 9, the men of Sodom say, "Stand back." Then they said, "This fellow came to sojourn, and he has become the judge. Now we will deal worse with you than with them." Then they pressed hard against the man Lot, and drew near to break the door down. The men of Sodom clearly felt judged by the things that Lot had been saying, and when attacking him verbally for his beliefs didn't work, they decided to attack him physically instead. There are 3 reasons why the men of Sodom should have thought twice before attacking Lot like this. 1. Violence is never a good solution. 2. They owed Lot their lives. Just a few years before, Abraham had rescued the entire population from an invading army because of Lot. 3. It doesn't look good for the future of the city if they're all running around in big gangs all night, hunting down any traveler who happens to go through. Once Israel became a nation, God regularly sent his prophets to remind them of God's teaching and to speak up when God's law was being forsaken. These prophets were often treated very poorly and accused of all sorts of things, from making up lies to betraying their country, even to speaking against God, when in fact the opposite was true. They were speaking for God. This is very similar to what we sometimes encounter today, being labeled as a bad person for believing a principle that God has clearly set out. There is a verse in Hebrews chapter 11 and verse 36 that describes what some of the prophets went through. Others suffered mocking and flogging, even chains and imprisonment. They were stoned, they were sawn in two, they were killed with a sword. They went about in skins of sheep and goats, destitute, afflicted, mistreated. Of whom the world was not worthy, wandering about in deserts and mountains, and in dens and caves of the earth. Even Jesus wasn't immune from this. He was accused of being a glutton, a winebibber, a friend of publicans and sinners, a lawbreaker, and even of speaking against God and Moses. And in the end, the people who hated what he was saying conspired to murder an innocent man because that's the only way they could stop him from professing his beliefs. People hate being told they are wrong and hate being told what to do, so it's very common for them to act harshly towards people that have different beliefs. Jesus warned us this would happen in John chapter 15 and verse 18. "If the world hates you, know that it has hated me before it hated you. If you were of the world would love you as its own. But because you are not of the world, but I chose you out of the world, therefore the world hates you." Paul also picks this up in his letter to Timothy, 2 Timothy 4 verse 3. "For the time is coming when people will not endure sound teaching, but having itching ears, they will accumulate for themselves teachers to suit their own passions." No one likes to hear things that they disagree with, so we tend to flock to people that believe the same things as we do. And that's why morality in our culture changes so fast, and conflicting opinions get censored. So in conclusion, if you find yourself getting pressured or made to feel bad for what you believe, remember that this has happened to lots of people before you, even Jesus. The morals and ethics of the societies in which we live will never totally align with God's principles and are always changing. God's principles, on the other hand, never change and always stay true. God always has very good reasons for why He instructs us to live our lives the way He does. Drifting away from these principles will have devastating effects for our societies as they get further and further away from God. So when questioned by others, go back to the basics, show them the misconceptions at the foundation of their beliefs, and explain why God's principles are logical and consistent and the best and only way to live your life. Thanks for listening. Please like and subscribe to stay in touch with future videos.